Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to talk about 4-color beans in Modern, specifically Cascade Beans, which is the new hotness in Modern, and it is so good. So in this deep dive, we're going to do a deck tech on this deck. We're going to be talking about flex slots along with slots that are kind of stock. This being a new archetype, there are a lot less stock slots than you would think. And then we're going to talk about how to sideboard against all the decks I think are like super playable and reasonably popular in Modern. So let's jump into it with my build of 4-color beans. So this is the 4-color beans deck that I have been grinding with. And I'm going to talk about the strategies of this deck, but give me a second to kind of sort things out. So the deck centers around card advantage of Up the Beanstalk. Up the Beanstalk is a 2-mana enchantment that when it enters the battlefield and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. On its surface, it doesn't seem that powerful. However, in Modern, there's a lot of cards that are mana value 5 or greater that we can cast for nothing or 1 mana, like Fury, like Solitude, like Leyline Binding. And we don't just have to play 4 Up the Beanstalk. In fact, we're playing 8 and arguably 12 technically, because Shardless Agent will always cascade into Up the Beanstalk. So Shardless Agent is just 1 more mana for Up the Beanstalk and a 2/2. And Bloodbraid Elf, at least 2/3 of the time, is going to cascade into effectively Up the Beanstalk. Bloodbraid Elf can hit Teferi Time Raveler, Up the Beanstalk, or Shardless Agent. If it hits Shardless Agent will cascade into Up the Beanstalk, and you get a bunch of creatures. If you cascade into Teferi Time Raveler, well, Teferi Time Raveler is frankly one of the most powerful planeswalkers in the format, and that is pretty okay too. You're playing effectively 12 Up the Beanstalks. And once you get multiple Up the Beanstalks online, you can pretty freely evoke Solitudes and Furies and cast Leyline Bindings to just churn through your deck incredibly quickly. And in addition to that, you're playing some of the most powerful cards in the format in your deck. And so being able to freely cast your spells, do a bunch every single turn, and churn through your deck is very, very powerful. Like drawing cards with this deck is a lot like drawing cards with a Legacy deck. Each card individually is so powerful. Speaking of Teferi Time Raveler, each opponent can cast spells only at time they can cast a sorcery. +1 until your next turn you may cast sorcery spells as though they have flash. We actually don't have any sorcery spells in our main deck at least. And its -3 is return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand and draw a card. So Teferi Time Raveler, again, being able to Bloodbraid into it is really good. Teferi is excellent in a lot of different ways. One of the big ones is it stops other Cascade decks, which now there's Living End, Rhinos, and the Mirror Match. Because when you cast the card off Cascade, there's already another thing on the stack, which is a time that you cannot cast a sorcery, which means you can't Cascade. Really good against counter magic, which can be kind of powerful. And it's -3. It's just really annoying to play against. Being able to return tokens, which is strong, but also Murktide Regents and et cetera, et cetera. You can also -3 on your own stuff. If you're kind of burnt out, you can return an Up the Beanstalk to your hand and then replay it. That's 2 cards for 3 loyalty and 2 mana. Or if you notice, all of the creatures in our deck have either cast triggers like Cascade or enter the battlefield triggers. So being able to return those to our hand and recast them to trigger more Up the Beanstalks and to have the end of the battlefield effects, also very powerful. And if Leyline Binding hits a token or something like that, recycling Leyline Binding is also really strong. We're playing 4 Yawgmoth, Locus of Creation, which is the 4-mana 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Already excellent, allows us to continue churning through our deck. And it has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. This is the first time this ability is resolved this turn. If it's the second time, add 1 of each of Yawgmoth's colors, so 1 of each color except for black. And if it's the third time, deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. So Yawgmoth being able to gain life is super relevant, but really you're playing Yawgmoth for that second ability, for that mana ability. The Dream turn 5 is casting Yawgmoth, playing a fetch land, gaining 4 life, fetching for an untapped land, 1 mana of every color, tap it, naturally cast a Solitude or Fury in the same turn, hopefully triggering some number of Up the Beanstalks. Speaking of Solitude and Fury, this is our primary removal. Solitude meaning a 5-mana elemental incarnation. 3/2 with flash and lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, it's a Swords of Plowshares, exile up to 1 other target creature. That creature's controller gains life equal to its power, and you can evoke it to exile a white card from your hand. So being able to cast Solitude is very, very powerful, especially since you can cast it for free. If we exile another white card from our hand, we have plenty of white cards in our deck, and we don't mind 2-for-1ing ourselves with that ability, especially if we have some number of Up the Beanstalk, because even if we're casting it for free, it is still 5 mana, it still triggers Up the Beanstalk. And then if we cast it like naturally, feels really good. Fury is the red portion of that cycle, is a 5-mana 3/3 with double strike. When Fury enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and/or planeswalkers, and you evoke it in the same way except for a red card. And it's for all of the same reasons. Fury has a little bit of upside that it can really 2-for-1 your opponent, especially when answering cards like Orcish Bowmasters if you already have an Up the Beanstalk on the battlefield. A really common play pattern is like you up the Beanstalk, your opponent Orcish Bowmasters in response, they get a 1/1 Orc army, trigger Up the Beanstalk, a 2/2 Orc army, and then you evoke Fury, trigger Orcish Bowmasters, a 3/3 Orc army, and then Fury resolves and you do 3 damage to the Orc army, 1 damage to Orcish Bowmasters, and now you're up 2 cards and they're down and we're doing good. I guess you're even on cards, but they're down in Orcish Bowmasters and you're even on cards. Leyline Binding is our other piece of removal. Leyline Binding, a 6-mana flash spell that is an O-ring. When it enters the battlefield, you exile a non-land permanent opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. However, it costs 1 less for each basic land type among lands you control. And so we're a 4-color deck, but we're also playing a Yawgmoth Triumph, so we can get that 5th level of domain, even though we don't care about black mana. So this is a often 2-mana O-ring that is flash, or sometimes even a 1-mana that, even though we're casting it for 1 or 2 mana, still triggers Up the Beanstalk, and we have these synergies with Teferi Time Raveler and all of that stuff. Let's play 4 Fire Ice. The thing about Fire Ice, what's cool is, one of the weaknesses of this deck is we can't play cards like Lightning Bolt or stuff like that because we don't want to cascade into them. We always want to cascade into Up the Beanstalk. So Fire Ice is kind of the next best thing. Fire Ice is technically 4 mana, so we cannot cascade into it. However, we can cast either side for 2 mana, so as early interaction, dealing 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets, or tapping target permanent and drawing a card. The Fire side is a very good answer to Orcish Bowmaster, which is, again, very strong against our deck. Decent burn spell, decent against Ragavan, especially if we're on the play. And then Ice on the other side is really good for buying time, tapping down really big creatures, especially if we get Fury scammed or something like that, or on your opponent's upkeep, tapping down a land just to churn through our deck. Also, relevantly, Fire is red, so you can pitch it to Fury, and Ice is blue, so you can pitch it to Commandeer. And then we're playing a 1 of Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. It's the only card in our main deck that is not a playset. It is 4 mana, 4 loyalty, and if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. And that's really the big thing we care about. This card's pretty good as well because we can +1 to mill 2 cards and draw a card. We side out Jace a reasonable amount, but frankly, the way especially the mirror match goes is we both churn through our deck so fast, we can't really kill each other super quickly because our deck is just full of answers and we're drawing a million cards. And if we don't draw a million cards, we're going to get overwhelmed by our opponent's answers and threats. And we're eventually not going to be able to answer something. And if we do draw a million cards, then often we deck out. So we play a 1 of Jace, Wielder of Mysteries for when we're about to deck out. We cast it, trigger Up the Beanstalk again, and win the game. Now, as far as our sideboard goes, we're playing 2 Auriok Champion. It is a 2-mana 1/1 protection from black and red. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you may gain 1 life. It's just solid against burn, but we mostly have it in as an infinite blocker against scam. And then also, it makes it so it's really hard for Yawgmoth to combo. They need to do weird things with Walk-in Ballista in order to answer it, because you're going to gain life as fast as they make you lose life with whatever cards. And so it just makes it really weird for them, and we love it being weird for them. Core Firewalker is literally for burn, and that is literally it. If we don't Core Firewalker, we don't have it on our sideboard, burn's a bad matchup. If we do, it's great because we can cascade into it. Playing 4 Commandeer. Commandeer, you can exile 2 blue cards rather than play the spell's mana cost, and we can gain control of target non-creature spell and choose new targets for it. The cool part about Commandeer is, again, it's 5 or more mana, so it triggers Up the Beanstalk, but also Commandeer, like, we're siding it in against decks that if we cast it once, we kind of win the game. I'm thinking like Tron, thinking like Scape Shift, Crashing Footfalls, burn, frankly, stuff like that. Playing Obsidian Charma because similar to the other version of Omnath, the One Ring Omnath deck, Tron is a pretty bad matchup, frankly, and so playing Obsidian Charma is really powerful in shoring up that bad matchup. Obsidian Charma also happens to be incidentally good against Amulet Titan because they do play lands that produce colorless mana, and being able to hit like one of those double lands is really solid. Force of Vigor for Artifact Hate. We're talking like Amulet again, Hardened Scales, Hammer Time, stuff like that. Also really good in the mirror match and against Omnath for, the Leyline Bindings and dealing with other Beanstalks. We're playing a single Supreme Verdict. Even though we run a lot of creatures, this really is a control deck. That's what this deck is like actually trying to do, and it's really important to understand that. So this is my build of 4-color, and it's really close to stock. Maybe instead of Acidian Charmaz, you played Endurance, and I'd call that the stock list. I just don't think Endurance is very good right now. But there are certain cards that are flex slots and certain cards that are non-flex slots that you can put into those flex slots. So in the last week, I made a flex slots video, so I'm going to insert a portion of that video here to kind of explain that. And I realize I'm sort of recycling content, but I feel like having all of this in one video is a really powerful thing. So I'm going to be wearing a different shirt. You're going to talk to Past Self, and I'll meet you after that for Sideboard Guide. Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan. Today we're going to talk about the 4-color Beans deck that has been tearing apart Modern, but we're going to be looking at the flex slots in the deck. What cards do you kind of have to play if you're playing this archetype, and where do you have some wiggle room? With it being a newer archetype, there's quite a bit of wiggle room. So let's look at the non-flex slots first. These are the non-flex slots in the deck, the cards that you sort of have to play. 4 Up the Beanstalk makes sense, that's our card advantage. Shardless Agent is essentially an Up the Beanstalk because we're always going to cascade into that, at least in the main deck. 3 Teferi Time Raveler, people have been cutting the 4th. At least 2 Omnath, 4 Fire Ice, 4 Fury, 4 Solitude, and 4 Leyline Binding. And in the sideboard, really the only agreed upon sideboard card among every archetype are 3 Force of Vigor. The rest of the way, we have some wiggle room. So, you can check out the deck tech of this deck to sort of look at why we're playing all of this. That's not what we're focusing on. But for the main deck, we have 8 flex slots, and for the sideboard, we have 12. So let's look at our options. So these are our main deck flex slots. For this deck, effectively, you select 8 of these. Some versions have been playing 61 cards, some versions have been playing 65, some have been playing 70. You can adjust your mana base accordingly. But effectively, it's play more of these cards. So I'm going to go through these cards and sort of talk about why you would play these cards in the main deck in these 8 flex slots. Dead and Gone is a really sweet early interaction spell that doesn't get hit by Cascade. And so having that early interaction is like really, really powerful in a Cascade deck that doesn't have super premium early interaction besides Leyline Binding. Force of Negation is a newer card that's being played in the main deck because the primary issue with this deck is while it like grinds really, really well with the best of them, it can die to combo pretty easily. So having that Force of Negation to be able to sort of stop that combo is pretty powerful. Some are playing 1 Endurance as Graveyard Hate. Ardent Plea. Most of the people that are playing Ardent Plea decide they don't really want Bloodbraid Elf, or it's in addition to Bloodbraid Elf as extra Cascade cards to be able to hit your beans very much quicker. A lot of people are playing the 4th Teferi. Just Teferi is very strong, especially alongside Bloodbraid Elf, in stopping other bean stacks and stopping counter magic and just having decent early interaction and a powerful Planeswalker. Some people are playing Jace Wielder of Mysteries. Jace Wielder of Mysteries is protection about drawing out your deck. When you get into a long game grind, especially when you get like 3 or maybe even 4 Up the Beanstalks, you just churn through your deck so quickly that sometimes you die to decking. And Jace can protect against that while also being a decent Planeswalker for card advantage. So a lot of people are playing it in the main deck as a 1-of, just so that they don't have to worry about drawing a million cards with Up the Beanstalk. It's not a big deal. Just play Jace before you die. Bloodbraid Elf as a 2 or 4-of is often being played just as like Bloodbraid into either Teferi or into Shardless Agent, and then Shardless Agent gets to cascade into Up the Beanstalk, and it's more threats, more ways to hit Up the Beanstalk and other relevant cards. And it's if you play 4 Bloodbraid Elf, it's because you're playing a much more proactive version of the deck. Some people are playing Omnath 3 and 4. Omnath is just an extremely powerful card. It goes along with the strategy reasonably well because it synergizes well with the Evoke Elementals and Fetch Lands, and being able to have the awesome turn 5 Omnath, Fetch Land, Fetch, Evoke Elemental. But some people are cutting them because it can be kind of clunky when you're just trying to like draw a ton of cards, play some cheap removal spells, and all that stuff. Some people are playing a 1-of Elesh Known in the main deck. Elesh Known is just famously very good alongside these Evoke Elementals. Basically, all the cards in the mirror match not do anything. 2 Lorien Revealed to be able to play less lands, and it's a card that triggers Up the Beanstalk and draws 5 cards. It's just really versatile. Time Warp, just a very good card that triggers Up the Beanstalk, allows you to draw some cards, attack, untap, do it again. Murderous Cut, 1 mana, it ends up being a removal spell, especially alongside fetch lands that trigger Up the Beanstalk. Eagles of the North is just like the white version of Lorien Revealed. It's a slightly worse Lorien Revealed, besides the fact that it is a creature and it is a threat. And this deck generally is a little bit light on threats. Magmatic Sinkhole is, you could, play Murderous Cut or Magmatic Sinkhole. 5 damage to target creature or Planeswalker, and it's 1 more to delve, so it seems a little bit worse because it's not just destroy, but being able to destroy opposing Planeswalkers, especially opposing Teferi Time Ravelers when you Cascade, is very powerful. And then there's a 2 or 3 of Elderdeep Fiend version that's kind of interesting that allows you to turn 4 Elderdeep Fiend on your opponent's upkeep, where because it has Flash, you Shardless Agent Cascade, untap, play your 4th land, pass on your opponent's upkeep, emerge, sacrificing Shardless Agent to be able to cast Elderdeep Fiend, tap all your opponent's land, and now you have a 5/6, and your opponent doesn't get to do anything that turn, is a pretty powerful thing to do. However, this card can flounder in your hand if you don't have a combo similar to that. So essentially what you're doing is you're choosing 8 of these cards. You choose 8 of these cards depending on your preference, depending on your matchups, and depending on how the deck feels. Now, as far as the sideboard goes, we can pick 12 of these cards, and I'm going to go over why you would pick some of these cards to go alongside Force of Vigor. Now, Auriok Champion is a kind of new one that people are adding to the sideboard. It's a card that you can Cascade into. It's really decent against the burn deck and also pretty decent against Scam. You side it in against both in the fact that it gains life and it's an infinite blocker against Scam. Core Firewalker is sort of like Auriok Champion, except it leans more towards the burn matchup. In fact, you only sided it against burn. If you're playing this card and you get paired against burn, what the awesome strategy is siding out of all of your Up the Beanstalks so you can always Cascade into Core Firewalker. So you're effectively playing 6, sometimes even 10 if you're playing the Foil Bloodbraid Elf Core Firewalker, because you will always Cascade into it. The Light of Sanctity is just a really decent card to be able to side in against Scam and to be able to side in against burn. Is just kind of, again, another one of those cards that we gives us a little bit of extra game. Inevitable Betrayal is a really fun card that we can Cascade into, and then reasonably suspend as well to be able to grab cards out of our opponent's deck. Basically, we would side this in against any deck that has creatures that would be interested in casting. That means other Evoke Elementals, Ulamog, stuff like that. Force of Negation, for the same reasons that we would be playing it in the main deck, we would be playing up to 2 in the sideboard. Subtlety is a really good way to interact with other Evoke Elementals, and a turn 0 way to interact with Grief and all that stuff. Commandeer is a really, really, really sweet card where basically we want to side this in against decks that if we ever cast Commandeer, we kind of just win the game. Talking like Tron, Crashing Footfalls, stuff like that. People are playing 2 to 4 in their sideboard. Any control of a non-creature spell is super powerful, but it's really important when you side it in, you make sure you have enough blue cards to be able to reasonably cast it. Murderous Cut we've already talked about for similar reasons you play it in the board. Alpine Moon is just a way to deal with Tron. Tron can be kind of a sketchy matchup, and it's a 1-mana way to deal with Tron because the Crumble to Dust and Obsidian Charma are kind of higher mana ways to deal with Tron, which can often be kind of sketchy. Alpine Moon being also like pretty decent against Urza Saga and stuff like that. Crumble to Dust, 4 mana, exile non-basic land, and then being able to extract that non-basic land that you exiled. It's mostly for Tron, but also reasonable against other decks that like have lands that you care about, like Amulet Titan and things like that. Same thing with Obsidian Charma, except there's a body on this one, and it's a size that you can cast it for sometimes even 2 mana, and then trigger up the Beanstalk, so a lot of people tend towards Obsidian Charma. Endurance for extra graveyard hate, up to 3 in your sideboard. Lavinia is another cool thing that you can Cascade into to stop other Cascade decks, to stop other Evoke Elementals and everything like that. Supreme Verdict, just very excellent against creature decks. Gemstone Cavern is being played to kind of get out ahead of these other decks for when you're on the draw. Play draw is starting to really, really matter in Modern, and Gemstone Cavern, when you're on the draw, can be pretty valuable. And then Curse Totem, another card that you can activate into to stop things that where triggered abilities of creatures can't be activated, mostly things like Yawgmoth and stuff like that. You're going to be picking 12 of these as your flex slots in the sideboard of your Beans deck. So let's talk about how to sideboard with this 4-color deck. So the most popular deck in Modern is Red-Black Scam, and the second most popular deck in Modern is Yawgmoth. And we're actually going to sideboard the same against both of these decks. What you're going to notice when we sideboard, it's almost like we're using our sideboard as silver bullets, because what we're doing in our main deck is so powerful. We kind of want to keep everything against pretty much every deck, except for in very specific scenarios. But against both Red-Black Scam and Yawgmoth, we're bringing in Auriok Champion. Auriok Champion is an infinite blocker against Red-Black Scam, except for the Menace creature, and it makes it difficult for Yawgmoth to combo. And then we're bringing in a Supreme Verdict. Just easy answers to board states is really, really relevant. We're bringing out Jace, Wielder of Mysteries against both of these decks because we don't plan on decking out. We're actually going to be siding out Jace a reasonable amount of the time. And we're bringing out 2 Teferi Time Raveler against both of these decks. While Teferi is really good against the scam stuff, they already have done their damage by that time. And Yawgmoth often plays as a go-wide creature deck against us, which Teferi is famously really bad against. This is how we sideboard against scam and Yawgmoth. The third most popular deck is Cascade Beans, and we're going to pair this with the Omnath deck, because I'm going to sideboard the same against 4-color Omnath, the Ring Omnath, and Cascade Beans Omnath. We're bringing in Commandeer. Being able to swipe pretty much any non-creature spell besides Fire Ice from our opponent is very good. Whether it's Up the Beanstalk, whether it's Teferi, whether it's Leyline Binding, whether it's the One Ring, both very good. And we're bringing in Force of Vigors to be able to hit Up the Beanstalk and Leyline Binding and just really turn the game around very, very quickly. We're bringing out Bloodbraid Elf. The game's going to go long. We don't really care about kind of rushing out these Up the Beanstalks. This is going to be a crazy, crazy grind. And Bloodbraid Elf kind of rarely gets through because everything blocks it profitably. And we're siding out 3 Leyline Binding because we know our opponent's siding in Commandeer and Force of Vigor, and so Leyline Binding loses a lot of stock. And so this is how I sideboard against Cascade Beans and 4-color Ring Omnath. Next most popular deck is Crashing Footfalls. We're going to be bringing in the 4 Commandeers because if we do it to a Footfalls, the game kind of ends. And then Supreme Verdict to clean up the board if they've already, done their thing. Fire Ice really only taps down land, which is fine against Cascade decks, but I'm not down. I don't really like it. And then we're bringing out a Jace because the game's pretty quick. We stop what they're doing, and then we just start attacking, and then the game is just over. We're rarely ever going to deck out. And so this is how I sideboard against Crashing Footfalls. The next most popular deck is Amulet Titan, where we're going to be bringing in the Obsidian Charma. Again, being able to hit those 2-mana lands is very powerful, and we can often cast it for less because they're playing things like Urza's Saga and Slayer's Stronghold and stuff like that. They can accidentally make Obsidian Charma cheaper. Bringing in Force of Vigor to deal with the Dryad and with the Amulets and other random stuff. It's really good against Urza as well. Going to be bringing in Supreme Verdict to kind of clean stuff up after the fact, and just really answers to Dryad is very strong in and of itself. Bringing out Jace. The game is not going to go super long. We're going to be bringing out the 4 Bloodbraid Elf because we're not looking to grind and get as many Up the Beanstalks on the battlefield as possible in this matchup, and Bloodbraid Elf is only fine because we're also going to be siding out 2 Teferi because Teferi just isn't very good. It doesn't do much in the matchup at all. I think the coolest thing Teferi does is return Urza Sagas, and that's about it. So this is how I sideboard against Amulet. The next most popular deck is Burn. We're bringing in Auriok Champion because it gains life and has protection from red. Bringing in Core Firewalker because it gains life and has protection from red. Bringing in Commandeers because, really, the deck is really good at counting to 20. And if you steal a single Burn spell, especially if you're then able to aim it at a creature, Burn can often flounder. Now, and this is the tech that a lot of people don't know about. We're going to be bringing out 4 Up the Beanstalks, and we're going to be bringing out 4 Teferi Time Ravelers. The reason for that is Shardless Agent and Bloodbraid Elf will then always cascade into Core Firewalker or Auriok Champion, and we can always gain life. So effectively, we're playing 12 spells that gain life, which makes this matchup actually pretty good. Now, there's one more card we don't want. Jace is god-awful because the game is especially not going to go long. And so we bring in Supreme Verdict, just like another thing to pitch to Commandeer or to Solitude. And, it can be fine if they have a creature hand, though creature hands are really bad against us. And so that's how I sideboard against Burn. Against Tron, we're bringing Obsidian Charma. Obsidian Charma is obscene against Tron. There we go. All right. Bringing in Commandeer. Being able to swipe a One Ring or a Karn the Great Creator. Karn the Great Creator is especially good because it means their O-Stones and their egg spells and stuff like that. They can't activate the abilities of them, even though we have no artifacts in our sideboard to grab. And we're bringing in Force of Vigor just to interrupt them a little bit with their artifacts. It's going to be very powerful. I'm not a big fan of Jace. If we draw out most of our deck, we should be winning. We're bringing out Teferi really does nothing in the matchup except for in very corner case things. We're bringing out 4 Fury, and then we're bringing out 1 Fire Ice. Now, the reason we're bringing out the 4 Fury and 1 Fire Ice rather than the other way around, because, they effectively do the same thing. But we want as many blue spells in our deck as possible to pitch to Commandeer. We're already bringing out the 4 Teferi Time Raveler and Jace. So that's my thinking, is that they do really similar things. But we really want to be able to cast Commandeer, because if that gets stuck in our hand with not enough blue spells, and then, they cast a One Ring, it's just the game ends up being over. I could see it being the other direction, though, if you're not worried about that. But this is how I sideboard.
The next most popular deck is Murktide, and we're actually set up pretty well to beat Murktide. The game's just not going to go long, so we want to take out the Jace, and we're going to bring in the Supreme Verdict. Being able to answer like a Murktide board that's uncounterable is really strong. They go pretty all in on their creatures, and the game isn't going to go long, so we don't need Jace. And so this is how we sideboard against Murktide. The next most popular deck is Hammer Time. We are obviously going to be bringing in the Force of Vigors, and then Supreme Verdict is pretty okay as well. We're bringing out the Jace, obviously, because the deck is very fast, and then we're going to split, taking out Bloodbraid Elf and taking out a Teferi Time Raveler. Teferi Time Raveler can be okay against the deck, can stop the Sigarda's stuff, and returning the Urza Saga tokens is really powerful and whatever. We're not really worried about getting as many up the Beanstalks or Teferis as possible, so shaving on Bloodbraid Elf is fine, but also applying pressure is really important against an explosive deck like Hammer Time. The next most popular deck is Hardened Scales, where, hey, you guessed it, we're going to sideboard exactly the same for exactly the same reasons, except for Supreme Verdict's even better against this deck. So sideboarding the same against Hardened Scales and against Hammer Time. The next most popular deck is Living End. Against Living End, we're bringing in Supreme Verdict, bringing out Jace. There's nothing else we want to do. Now, if Obsidian Charma was Endurance, like kind of stock is, you'd also be bringing in Endurance, but Living End just isn't super popular right now, so meh. Incidentally, we're also going to be siding like this against Zoo, because there's nothing in our sideboard we care about against Zoo. And our main deck answers Zoo pretty well anyway, so the Supreme Verdict in and the Jace out. So there you have a deep dive into 4-color Cascade Beans in Modern. If you like videos like this and want to see more, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description, especially on Twitter and Discord. Join the communities there, chat with me, whatever. And on Patreon, where I post these sideboard guides in text form for your enjoyment. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.